Good morning, everyone. It is truly a blessing to stand before you today, sharing a message of hope and faith. Our lives are full of challenges, obstacles, and moments of uncertainty. In these times, it is easy to feel as though we are alone, abandoned in a world that seems to be spinning faster than we can keep up with. But I am here today to remind you of something profound, something that transcends all of life's difficulties. God will appear and help you. We are not alone, even when we feel we are. Throughout history, in countless cultures and religions, there has been one constant message: God is always with us. In our moments of despair, when it feels as though we are drowning in the weight of our worries, God's presence is nearer than we often realize. Think of the times in your life when you faced overwhelming challenges. Maybe it was a moment of personal loss, a struggle with health, or a time of financial hardship. In those moments, didn't you feel, even just for a second, a sense of peace that seemed to come from nowhere? Did you ever experience a door opening when you thought there were no more options? That is the quiet but powerful work of God in your life. God has a way of appearing at just the right moment. Sometimes His help doesn't come in the way we expect or on our timeline. We might pray for a solution, for clear guidance, or for a miracle to appear immediately. But often God's help comes in more subtle ways. It might come through the words of a friend, the comfort of family, or the stillness of nature. It might come through a simple yet profound moment of clarity or inspiration. It is easy to forget, but God's help is not always about taking the burden away entirely. It is about giving us the strength to endure, the wisdom to make decisions, and the love to keep moving forward even when the path seems unclear. In every trial, we have the opportunity to grow, to find strength we never knew we had, and to rely on a higher power that is always beside us, even when we cannot see it. In the Bible, in the Quran, in many spiritual texts, God's presence is promised to us time and time again. One of the most reassuring verses in the Bible is found in Isaiah 41:10, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This is not just a comforting verse. It is a promise that we are never alone. Even when the road seems long and the night seems dark, God is there, walking beside us, guiding us toward the light. But we must also remember that God's help often requires us to open our hearts and minds. When we feel lost, it can be easy to close off from others, to turn inward in our pain and fear. Yet, God's help often arrives when we open ourselves to the love and support around us. It might be through a prayer, a moment of stillness, or even reaching out to others for support. God's grace is often experienced when we humble ourselves enough to receive it. So no matter what you are facing today, no matter the struggle, I want to remind you of one truth: God will appear and help you. His presence is there. In the quiet moments, in the loud storms, in the whispers of peace. Trust in that truth even when it is hard to see. God's help may not always look the way we expect, but it is always there, always ready to lift us, to guide us, and to help us through. Throughout history, one of the most central and enduring themes in many religious and spiritual traditions is the idea of God's constant presence in our lives. In moments of joy and sorrow, through times of peace and conflict, believers have been reminded they are never truly alone. So, God's presence is often described as ever-present, unshakable, and unwavering, a comforting thought for those who may feel lost or abandoned. This concept, however, can be difficult to grasp fully, especially when life's challenges and hardships weigh heavily on our hearts. We may feel isolated in our struggles, as though the world has become too much for us to handle alone, and at times it may seem as though God has turned away. Yet the message that echoes through sacred texts and spiritual teachings is clear: God is always with us, even when we feel disconnected from Him. For many, the concept of God's constant presence brings both comfort and mystery. How can we experience the presence of a divine being in a world that often seems chaotic, impersonal, or indifferent? It can be challenging to see or feel God's hand at work, especially in times of personal suffering or uncertainty. But this is where faith comes in. Faith is the bridge that connects the visible world to the unseen, the tangible to the intangible. It is through faith that we begin to understand that God's presence is not always a dramatic or overt experience. Instead, it often manifests in quiet, subtle ways that require us to open our hearts and eyes to the stillness around us. The notion that God is always with us is reinforced in countless sacred scriptures. In the Bible, for example, one of the most powerful affirmations of God's constant presence comes from the words of the prophet Isaiah, who speaks on behalf of God, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand," Isaiah 41:10. This verse is a profound reassurance to anyone who might be feeling fearful, overwhelmed, or uncertain. It serves as a reminder that no matter the circumstances, God is present and will provide the strength and support needed to face the trials of life. In this verse, God is not just present in an abstract sense. He is actively involved in the lives of his people, offering help, guidance, and protection. In a similar vein, in the New Testament, Jesus promises his disciples that he will not leave them orphans, that he will be with them even until the end of the age, Matthew 28:28. This promise is not limited to the disciples of the past, but extends to all of humanity. It is a universal affirmation that God's presence transcends time and space. No matter how far we may feel from him, no matter how disconnected we may become from his love, he is always present, waiting for us to recognize him. But God's presence is not always something we can immediately perceive with our senses. It is not always a physical presence we can see or touch. In fact, many people have spent years searching for God's presence in the world around them and have struggled to find it. This can be particularly true in times of great pain, when it seems that God has been silent or distant. People experiencing personal loss, illness, or difficult life transitions might wonder where God is in their suffering. It is in these moments, when it seems that God's presence is hidden, that faith becomes even more critical. Faith allows us to trust in God's presence even when we cannot see it. It gives us the ability to continue moving forward in life even when we feel abandoned or alone. The presence of God in these times can often be felt in the quiet moments of reflection, in the moments when we stop and simply allow ourselves to feel. Sometimes we might feel God's presence in the kindness of a stranger, in the love of a family member, or in the stillness of nature. It is often when we open our hearts to the world around us that we begin to sense the divine working in subtle but powerful ways. This is why so many people who have gone through significant struggles or hardships report experiencing a deepened sense of faith after their trials. They come to recognize that God's presence was never absent. It was simply hidden in plain sight, waiting for them to acknowledge it. In the Quran too, God's presence is affirmed as a constant and ever close reality. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, "And when my servants ask you concerning me, indeed I am near. I respond to the invocation of the supplicant when he calls upon me," Quran 2:186. This verse highlights the nearness of God, emphasizing that he is not distant or detached from his creation, but is instead intimately close to us, especially in our moments of need. Just as a parent is near to a child, offering comfort and reassurance, God is near to his believers, always ready to listen to their prayers, their pleas, and their needs. It is through this closeness that individuals can find solace and strength, knowing that God's presence is a constant, dependable source of support. However, understanding God's constant presence is not always easy, especially when we are faced with suffering, injustice, or moments of profound loneliness. In these times, it may feel as though God has forgotten us or that his presence is too distant to help. This feeling of abandonment is a common human experience, but it does not negate the truth of God's promise. Sometimes God's presence might seem less tangible because of the intensity of our pain. Yet these moments of struggle are also opportunities to deepen our faith and trust in God's plan, knowing that he is walking with us even when we cannot see him. His presence is not conditional upon our feelings of closeness to him. Rather, it is a constant, unchanging truth that transcends our emotions and experiences. It is also worth noting that God's constant presence is not just a source of comfort, but also a call to action. Knowing that God is always with us should inspire us to live our lives in a way that reflects his love, compassion, and mercy. It should encourage us to act with kindness, to serve others, and to seek justice, as we understand that we are accountable to God in all aspects of our lives. The knowledge of his constant presence should be a reminder that we are not only responsible for our actions, but also that we have the support of a loving, ever-present God who is there to help us live out his will in the world. For those who may not feel God's presence immediately, it is important to remember that our experience of God's closeness can vary at different times in our lives. There will be seasons of intense spiritual connection where we feel enveloped in God's love, and there will be times when we feel distant or disconnected. Both of these experiences are part of the spiritual journey. The key is to continue seeking God even when it feels as though He is far away. This seeking is not about searching for God as if He is lost, but rather about being open to His presence in whatever form it may take. It is about cultivating the awareness that God's presence is always there, even when we do not feel it, and learning to trust that His timing is always perfect. God's constant presence is not only a source of comfort, but also a call to live with greater purpose and intentionality. It is a reminder that we are never alone, that we are always held in the embrace of a loving Creator, and that we can always turn to Him for guidance, support, and strength. Whether in times of joy or sorrow, success or failure, we are never left to navigate life on our own. God is always near, always ready to listen, always prepared to offer help in our times of need. Throughout life, we often find ourselves yearning for God's intervention in times of hardship, suffering, or uncertainty. In these moments, it is only natural to hope for a clear, direct sign that God is there, offering a solution or a miracle to lift us out of our struggles. We may pray fervently for an immediate change, a sudden intervention, or a miraculous breakthrough that will make everything better. However, God's help doesn't always arrive in the way we expect. The form in which divine assistance comes may differ significantly from our human expectations, and it is essential for us to understand that God's help can manifest in various ways that are not always immediately recognizable or aligned with our desires. God's help is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It does not always appear as a sudden, dramatic act of intervention. Instead, it often comes in more subtle, unexpected forms that may require us to open our eyes and hearts to the world around us. The idea that God's help can come in different forms is rooted in the understanding that God's wisdom is far beyond our own. As humans, we often view the world through the narrow lens of our immediate needs, but God sees the bigger picture. His help may not always be about changing our circumstances, but about giving us the strength, guidance, and patience to navigate them with faith and grace. One of the most profound ways God's help comes is through the strength He provides during times of adversity. When we face life's challenges, whether it is the loss of a loved one, financial difficulties, health issues, or emotional struggles, it often feels as though we cannot bear the weight of it all. In such moments, it is easy to feel overwhelmed, as though we have reached the limits of our endurance. Yet, even in these darkest moments, God's help often comes in the form of strength that we did not know we had. This strength is not a physical force, but a deep inner resilience that enables us to keep going step by step, even when we feel like giving up. God's help in these times might not be an immediate removal of the pain, but rather a quiet assurance that we have the power to endure, to continue on the path, and to grow stronger through the experience. Another form of divine assistance that many people experience is the guidance that God offers in times of confusion or uncertainty. Life is full of decisions, some of which can be life-altering. In moments of doubt, it is natural to wonder whether we are making the right choices or if we are on the right path. In these moments, God's help comes through the gentle nudging of the Holy Spirit, the still small voice that leads us toward the best course of action. This guidance may come in many different ways: through an inner sense of peace that accompanies a decision, through the advice of a trusted friend or family member, through Scripture, or through circumstances that seem to align in a way that points us in the right direction. In this way, God's help is not always about providing a clear-cut answer, but about leading us step by step, helping us to discern the right path, and providing peace of mind as we walk forward in faith. In addition to strength and guidance, another form of God's help is the comfort and peace that He provides in times of grief or sorrow. Life often brings moments of heartache that can feel unbearable: the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, or the failure of a dream. In these moments, it is easy to feel isolated and lost, as though the weight of the world is too much to carry alone. Yet in these moments of sorrow, God's help comes in the form of His comforting presence. It may not be a physical manifestation, but many people describe feeling a sense of peace and calm that transcends their understanding, as though they are being held in the arms of divine love. This peace doesn't necessarily take away the pain, but it allows people to endure it with hope, knowing that God is near, that He understands their grief, and that He is there to provide solace when nothing else seems sufficient. In addition to these personal forms of help, God's assistance often comes through the hands of others. God often uses people as instruments of His love and grace. This could be a friend who offers a listening ear, a stranger who provides a kind word or gesture, or a family member who supports us when we feel at our lowest. Sometimes God's help is experienced through the generosity of others, whether in the form of financial support, acts of kindness, or simple companionship. People are often God's messengers, bringing comfort, encouragement, and assistance in times of need. We may be called upon to be those instruments of help for others, as God uses us to bless those who are struggling. One powerful example of God's help through the hands of others can be seen in the story of the Good Samaritan, told by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. In this parable, a man is beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. 2 people pass by without helping, but a third, a Samaritan, stops and cares for the injured man, providing him with food, shelter, and medical attention. In this story, the Samaritan is acting as an instrument of God's mercy, demonstrating that God's help can come through the compassion and actions of others. In our own lives, we may be the recipient of such help, or we may be called to offer it to others in their time of need. Another way that God's help comes is through the wisdom and understanding we gain over time. As we face difficulties and challenges, we often learn valuable lessons that shape our character and deepen our faith. These lessons may not be apparent in the midst of our struggles, but as we look back, we can see how God has used our experiences to refine us, to teach us patience, to strengthen our resolve, and to increase our empathy for others. This is another form of God's help, not immediate relief from pain, but the growth and transformation that occurs as a result of enduring hardship with faith. Sometimes God's help comes not by removing our trials, but by allowing us to learn and grow through them, emerging from the experience wiser, more compassionate, and more spiritually mature. Sometimes God's help comes through the simple gift of hope. In times when everything seems bleak, when we cannot see a way out of our struggles, God offers us the gift of hope, a vision of a brighter future, a reminder that this too shall pass. Hope is a powerful form of help because it gives us the strength to keep going, even when the path ahead seems unclear. It is through hope that we can face each day with renewed purpose, knowing that God has a plan for us even when we cannot see it. Hope keeps our hearts open to the possibility of change, healing, and redemption, and it enables us to trust that God is working even in the most difficult circumstances. Finally, God's help often comes in the form of divine timing. We may not understand why certain things happen in our lives or why certain prayers seem to go unanswered. But God's timing is perfect. There are moments in life when we feel as though our prayers have been ignored or that God has delayed His response to our needs. However, over time we often realize that God's timing is far better than our own. The help we need may come at just the right moment, even if it is not the moment we expected or wanted. In retrospect, we can see how God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating events in a way that we could not have imagined. His timing is always for our good, even when it does not align with our own sense of urgency or expectation. In conclusion, God's help comes in many forms, and it is important for us to recognize that His assistance may not always look the way we think it should. Whether through strength, guidance, comfort, the actions of others, wisdom, hope, or divine timing, God's help is always present, even if it is not always immediately apparent. We are never alone, and God is always working in our lives, often in ways that we cannot yet understand. The key is to remain open to the many ways in which His help can come and to trust that He is always near, ready to provide exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. In the journey of life, one of the most profound truths that many spiritual traditions share is that God is always there to help us. However, recognizing and receiving this divine assistance is not always as straightforward as we might expect. God's help, while constant, is often subtle and may not come in the form we anticipate. To fully experience and benefit from God's help, we must cultivate a deep openness in our hearts and minds. Being open to God's help requires us to be receptive to His presence, His timing, and the ways in which He works in our lives. This openness is not merely a passive waiting for divine intervention, but an active engagement with faith, trust, and humility. Openness to God's help is not something that happens automatically. It is a process that involves surrendering our own limited understanding of how things should unfold and allowing God to work in ways that may not always align with our plans or desires. We may have a vision for how we want things to unfold in our lives, And often our sense of control and our need for certainty can create a barrier to receiving God's help. We might ask for divine assistance, but in doing so, we may already have an idea of how we want that help to appear. When we hold tightly to our own expectations, we can miss the more subtle ways in which God is offering His guidance, strength, and support. Being open to God's help begins with letting go of our own preconceived notions about what that help should look like. We often picture divine intervention as something dramatic, perhaps a miracle that will instantly solve all our problems, a sudden burst of clarity that reveals the answer to every question, or a complete transformation of our circumstances. While these things certainly happen in the world, they are not always the most common ways God offers His assistance. In fact, God's help often comes in quieter, less dramatic forms through the voices of loved ones, the inner prompting of the Holy Spirit, or the gentle guidance we receive in moments of stillness and reflection. Openness to God's help requires us to listen more deeply to our hearts, our intuition, and our surroundings. We must create space for God's presence in our lives by setting aside time for prayer, meditation, or quiet contemplation. When we fill our lives with constant noise and distractions, it becomes increasingly difficult to hear the whisper of God's guidance. It is often in the silence, the stillness that we are most able to sense His presence and discern His will. This doesn't mean that we must be in a state of constant prayer or meditation to be open to God's help, but it does mean that we must be willing to pause, to reflect, and to pay attention to the signs and impressions that come to us. A crucial aspect of being open to God's help is the ability to trust in His timing and wisdom. We live in a fast-paced world where we are accustomed to instant gratification. When we pray for help, we often expect immediate answers, clear solutions, or swift interventions. However, God's timing does not always align with our own. He is not bound by the constraints of time that we experience, and His understanding of what is best for us is far more expansive than our limited view of the world. Sometimes, God's help comes not in the form of immediate relief, but in a gradual unfolding of events, leading us down a path that will ultimately bring us to the right place at the right time and with the right understanding. Trusting in God's timing can be one of the most difficult aspects of being open to His help. We often want things to happen on our schedule, according to our plans, and when things don't happen as quickly as we hope, it can be easy to become frustrated or discouraged. Yet God's timing is always perfect. He knows the full scope of our lives, our potential, and our purpose. What we might perceive as a delay or an unanswered prayer could in fact be part of a larger plan that is being carefully unfolded. Our faith and trust in God are tested when we choose to remain patient and open, even when the answers we seek do not come as quickly as we desire. Openness to God's help also requires humility. Humility is the willingness to acknowledge that we are not in control of everything in our lives. It means recognizing that as much as we may try to navigate life on our own, we cannot always solve every problem or fix every situation by our own efforts alone. Humility invites us to surrender our need for control and to allow God to lead us, even when the path is unclear or uncomfortable. This surrender does not imply weakness or a lack of agency. Rather, it is a conscious decision to trust in God's strength and wisdom, knowing that His guidance will always be more beneficial than our own limited understanding. When we approach God with humility, we open ourselves to receiving His help in whatever form it may take. We acknowledge that we are not self-sufficient and that we need His assistance, even when we are not sure exactly what that help will look like. It is in this space of humility that God's grace can work most effectively. Humility creates the fertile ground for growth and transformation, allowing us to be shaped by God's wisdom rather than clinging to our own narrow view of the world. Being open to God's help also involves a willingness to be changed by that help. Often the help we receive from God is not just about changing our external circumstances, but about transforming us on the inside. God's help may not always look like an instant solution to our problems, but it often involves a deeper transformation within us, a shift in perspective, a new understanding of ourselves and our situation, or a growth in character and faith. Sometimes the help we receive is about learning to cope with a difficult situation rather than having that situation miraculously removed. It may involve developing resilience, patience, or compassion, qualities that make us stronger and better able to navigate life's challenges in the future. Being open to God's help means being open to the possibility that the help we receive may not always align with our immediate desires or expectations. We may pray for God to remove a difficulty from our lives, but His answer may be to give us the strength to endure that difficulty, to learn from it, and to grow through it. God's help often works in ways that are beyond our immediate comprehension. And it is only through time and reflection that we come to understand the wisdom behind His responses to our prayers. Openness to God's help also involves gratitude. It is easy to become focused on what we lack, on the areas of our lives where we feel we need help, and to overlook the countless ways in which God is already working in our lives. Sometimes the help we seek is already present, but we fail to recognize it because we are too focused on what we don't have or what we wish were different. Cultivating an attitude of gratitude helps us to become more aware of the ways God is already blessing us, and it opens our hearts to receiving more of His help. Gratitude helps shift our perspective from a sense of scarcity to one of abundance, allowing us to see the many ways God is providing for us, even when we don't always realize it. Being open to God's help requires a willingness to step out in faith, even when we don't have all the answers. It means trusting that God is working behind the scenes, even when we can't see the full picture. Openness to God's help is an active, ongoing choice to remain receptive to His guidance, to trust in His wisdom, and to surrender our own need for control. It is a decision to let go of our expectations and to allow God to work in ways that may be beyond our understanding. In doing so, we open ourselves to the full range of help, support, and transformation that God is eager to provide. And when we make that decision, we find that God is faithful, and His help comes to us in the most beautiful, unexpected, and life-changing ways. In closing, let us walk forward with confidence, knowing that we are not alone. God will appear and help us. And with that belief in our hearts, we can face any challenge, overcome any obstacle, and find peace even in the most turbulent times. Thank you, and may God bless you all.